The Galactic Council chamber, sorry, let me rephrase that. The grand assembly of civilized species sat in their impossibly tall towers on Station Zanara, looking down at the latest applicant species with what can only be described as bureaucratic disdain. You know the type, the kind of beings who've never had to fight for anything, who've been handed the keys to faster-than-light travel by species that came before them, who measure their worth in how many subcommittees they can form before lunch. And there, standing in the center of the ridiculous circular platform, because of course it had to be circular and ridiculously large, was Ambassador Kenji Okonkwo, representing a little blue marble called Earth. Now, I should mention something important here. I'm Vrixtal, a junior analyst for the Korim Collective, and I was there that day, taking notes in the back like the good little drone they expected me to be. I'd witnessed 43 species get accepted into the council over my 2-century career. It was always the same song and dance: show us your technology, prove you're peaceful, sign here, welcome to the club, don't start any wars. Humans though, humans were different. Kenji stood there in what they call a suit, some kind of formal textile arrangement that serves absolutely no protective purpose, but apparently signals seriousness in their culture, and he wasn't nervous. That should have been the first sign. Every other species that stood on that platform radiated anxiety like a beacon. The Trellans had actually shed their outer carapace from stress. The Ymara delegation had required sedatives just to stop their chromatophores from flashing distress colors. But Kenji, he looked almost amused. High Chancellor Vornix, a Centaurian with more titles than I have fingers, began the proceedings with his usual pompous drone. Species designation: humanity. Planet of origin: Earth. Third orbital position: Sol system, Orion Cygnus arm. You have submitted your application for membership in the Galactic Council. We have reviewed your materials. The pause that followed was heavy enough to generate its own gravity well. Your application is denied. You could have heard a pin drop. Actually, you couldn't, because we were in a chamber with acoustic dampening fields. But you get the metaphor. Kenji didn't flinch, didn't argue. He just tilted his head slightly, a gesture I would later learn meant he was calculating something, and asked, "May I inquire as to the reasoning?" Vornix's facial tentacles rippled with what I recognized as condescension. Your species is too violent. Your history is stained with warfare, genocide, and destruction. You have barely achieved fusion power, and yet you've already weaponized it. You war among yourselves over resources, ideology, and what was it? He consulted his datapad. Sports teams. A few of the council members made sounds that might have been laughter. The Zorvathian delegate's gill flaps definitely fluttered with amusement. Furthermore, Vornix continued, warming to his subject now, your technology level is insufficient. You've barely left your own planetary system. Your faster-than-light capability is theoretical at best. You have no energy-to-matter conversion technology, no quantum entanglement communication network. No, we sent you a list of what we do have, Kenji interrupted quietly. Oh, that got their attention. You don't interrupt a High Chancellor. Ever. I'd seen species lose their applications for less. Vornix's skin shifted to a deeper purple. Definitely anger. Yes. Quite primitive. Chemical propulsion. Fission reactors. Combustion engines. These are technologies most species develop within their first millennia of civilization. You're not ready for the galactic stage, Ambassador Okonkwo. Perhaps in another 1,000 years, after you've evolved beyond your violent tendencies, you may reapply. Here's where it got interesting. Kenji smiled. Not a big smile, just a slight upturn at the corners of his mouth that somehow made the temperature in the room drop about 5 degrees. I see. And if we choose not to wait? The council chamber went dead silent. Even the ever-present hum of the station's environmental system seemed to pause. Councillor Thaxara, a void-born known for her direct approach, leaned forward. "Excuse me." "You heard me correctly," Kenji said, his voice carrying that perfectly polite tone that somehow managed to be more threatening than any shout. "We're not asking for permission to reach the stars, Chancellor. We were being polite. We came here as a courtesy, to see if there was a civilized framework we could work within. You've made it clear there isn't. Not for us anyway. You cannot simply, Vornix began, but Kenji was already moving. He pulled out a small device. I later learned they called it a tablet, and tapped it a few times. The holographic display in the center of the chamber, which had been showing Earth's primitive statistics, suddenly shifted to something else entirely. A ship. But not just any ship. The Vanguard-class explorer, though we didn't know that's what they called it yet, hung in space above Earth's moon in the projection. And let me tell you, it was gorgeous in the way a predator is gorgeous. All angular surfaces designed to deflect sensor scans, hull plating that seemed to drink in light rather than reflect it, and weapon ports that the humans hadn't even tried to disguise as anything else. 6 months ago, Kenji said conversationally, as if he wasn't showing the Council something that should have been impossible, we finished construction on the first of 12 Explorer-class vessels. They're equipped with what we call Alcubierre drives. Our version of FTL, based on manipulating space-time rather than entering alternate dimensions like most of you use. Different approach, similar result. He swiped again. The display shifted to show a mining operation on an asteroid, but the scale was enormous. Hundreds of automated drones swarming over the rock like mechanical insects, extracting and processing materials at a rate that made even the efficient Zorvathians look slow. We've established 17 mining operations across our system, he continued. Fully automated. We're pulling in approximately 4.3 billion metric tons of refined materials annually. That's with primitive technology, as you said. Another swipe. This time, the display showed what looked like a habitat, a massive rotating structure in space, gleaming with solar panels and greenhouse domes. We've built 6 permanent off-world colonies: Mars, Luna, Europa, Titan, and 2 free-floating stations. Population approximately 300,000 humans living off Earth full-time, with another million working in orbital facilities. The Council was watching now. Really watching. I could see Vornix's tentacles had gone rigid, which in Centaurians indicates focused attention bordering on alarm. This was accomplished, Kenji said, his voice taking on an edge, by a violent, Tirapiv species using inferior technology over the span of 70 years. Now I wonder, and forgive me if this sounds impolite, but I wonder what we'll accomplish over the next 70 years without Council oversight. Without their regulations, without their bureaucracy. Texara's void black eyes narrowed. Are you threatening us? Threatening? Kenji's eyebrows rose. Another human gesture I was learning to read. Counselor, we're a species that looked at the vacuum of space, an environment that wants to kill us in about a dozen different ways, and decided to live there anyway. We're descended from primates who looked at animals bigger, faster, and stronger than us, and decided to hunt them to extinction using nothing but rocks and persistence. We've fought wars that killed millions, survived plagues that killed millions more, and every single time we've come back stronger. He took a step forward. Nobody stopped him. So, no, I'm not threatening you. I'm explaining reality. You can let us join your club, work within your rules, trade with your species, and benefit from the absolutely insane work ethic and creativity that comes from being an aggressive, competitive, never-satisfied species. Or another step forward, you can deny us, send us home, and watch from your comfortable towers as we build our own network, establish our own colonies, and completely bypass your authority. Because here's something you need to understand about humans, Chancellor Vornix. The smile was back. But it wasn't pleasant anymore. We don't wait for permission, we never have. I watched the Council members exchange glances, nervous glances. The kind of looks you give each other when you realize you might have made a tactical error. But Vornix, to his credit or his detriment, wasn't backing down. You lack the technology to compete with established species. Your FTL is untested. Your weapons are primitive. Our weapons. Kenji laughed. Actually laughed. Chancellor, we developed nuclear weapons before we had transistors. We created viruses that could end our own species while we were still figuring out basic genetics. We've got AI systems that terrify our own researchers. Biotechnology that crosses ethical lines we draw specifically because we know we'd cross them otherwise. and more ways to kill each other efficiently than we have ways to save each other. He leaned on the podium, casual, relaxed, utterly confident, and that's just the stuff we're willing to tell you about. You think being denied entry to your club is going to stop us? You think we're going to go home, sit on our hands, and wait for you to decide we're civilized enough? We're humans. We made it to the top of the food chain on a death world by being too stubborn to die and too creative to follow anyone else's rules. The chamber had gone so quiet I could hear my own circulatory system pumping. So here's what's going to happen, Kenji said, straightening up. We're going to leave this station, go back to our primitive little planet with our violent tendencies and inferior technology, and we're going to do what we do best. We're going to build. We're going to expand, we're going to innovate. And in 50 years, maybe less, you're going to look up and realize that there's a new power in the galaxy, one that didn't ask for your approval or wait for your permission. He picked up his tablet and started walking toward the exit. Just walking away from the council. The sheer audacity of it made my primary heart skip a beat. But then he paused at the doorway, looked back over his shoulder, and delivered the line that I will remember until my dying day. By the way, we'll be establishing our first extrasolar colony in the Proxima system within 18 months. Just thought you should know. Since it's only 4 light-years from here, we'll try to keep the noise down. And then he left. Just walked out. Left the entire Galactic Council sitting there in stunned silence, trying to figure out what the hell just happened. Councillor Rennick, who'd been quiet throughout, finally spoke up, his vocal synthesizer crackling with what might have been concern. Did he just tell us they're colonizing Proxima? Proxima Centauri is unclaimed space, Thexara said slowly. But it's also 3.7 light-years from Centaurian space, Vornix finished, his skin now a pale, sickly blue, and 4.8 from the Quarren Collective. Every one of the council members suddenly looked very uncomfortable. That's when I noticed something on my datapad, a message that had just come through on the public feeds. A press release from Earth, time-stamped for simultaneous release with the council session. Humanity reaches for the stars, independence declared. The article detailed everything Kenji had just told us, plus a few extra surprises. Defensive satellites being positioned around Earth. Contact with 17 other pre-FTL species in their local cluster, sharing technology and forming what they called the Cooperation of Independent Systems. Plans for a trade network that completely bypassed council space. They'd planned this. All of it. The application had never been about joining, it had been about announcement. I was promoted, if you can call it that, moved from junior analyst to special observer, assigned to monitor human expansion. Turns out that when you're the only being in the entire Quarren bureaucracy who actually read the full human application package instead of just skimming the summary, you become valuable. Who knew paying attention would be rewarded? So there I was, stationed on Quarren Outpost 77 Delta, watching long-range sensors as humanity did exactly what Kenji promised they would do, except faster and weirder than anyone predicted. The Proxima colony. Online in 14 months, not 18, and it wasn't some small research station either. It was a full industrial complex, with shipyards, refineries, and enough defensive platforms to make even the most aggressive species think twice about showing up uninvited. But that wasn't the part that had the council in emergency sessions 3 times a week. It was the weird stuff, the human stuff. See, when most species reach for the stars, they follow established patterns, build ships, find habitable planets, terraform if necessary, settle down, expand gradually. It's logical, it's predictable, it's boring as hell, honestly, but it works. Humans looked at all those established patterns and said, interesting. Now watch this. They built a generation ship, an actual generation ship. Something most species abandoned as inefficient after FTL was discovered, except they weren't using it for colonization. They'd converted it into a mobile university. The Galileo, they called it, a 5-kilometer-long vessel carrying 10,000 students, researchers and teachers, just cruising around the galaxy, learning stuff. Not going anywhere in particular, just existing as a floating campus where humans could study everything from stellar phenomena to xenobiology. Why? because apparently some human named Amara Santos argued that education shouldn't be confined to planets, and enough other humans thought that sounded fun that they actually built the thing. With private funding. In 8 months. Then there was the incident with the art installation. A human sculptor named Victor Zhao decided that the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter was the perfect canvas for what he called the largest art project in human history. He convinced 12 mining companies to donate materials and labor, rallied about 5,000 volunteers, and over the course of 3 months, they arranged 17,000 asteroids into a pattern that, when viewed from a specific point in space, formed an image of Earth as seen from the Moon during the Apollo 11 landing. The pattern was 60 million kilometers across. 60 million. For art. Because humans apparently have a deep psychological lure to prove they exist, by making really big pointless things that are nonetheless beautiful. The Zorvethian Empire, whose territory the asteroid arrangement was technically visible from, filed a formal complaint about light pollution. The human response was to invite them to a gallery opening. I heard 300 Zorvethians actually showed up, and 2 of them cried. Well, their equivalent of crying because they'd never considered that space itself could be a canvas. But the real chaos started when Captain Yuki Nakamura made contact with the Dreth. Now, the Dreth are a problematic species. Aggressive, territorial, technologically advanced, and absolutely zero interest in joining the Galactic Council or following anyone's rules but their own. They'd been left alone primarily because their space was resource poor and nobody wanted to fight them badly enough to bother. Nakamura, commanding the human explorer vessel Tenacity, accidentally jumped into Dreth space due to a navigation error. At least, that's what the official report said, though I have my doubts. And instead of running when 3 Dreth warships showed up, she opened a communication channel and challenged them to a drinking contest. I'm not making this up, I heard the transmission recordings myself. The Dreth commander, a warrior named Grethkor, was apparently so confused by the audacity of this possess that he agreed just to see what would happen. 6 hours later, Nakamura and her crew had drunk Grethkor and his warriors under the table using something called tequila, taught them a human game called poker, and established a trade agreement for Dreth military-grade shield technology in exchange for human alcohol and spicy earth food. The Dreth, it turned out, had never encountered capsaicin before. They became obsessed with it. Obsessed. Within 2 months, there were human hot sauce manufacturing facilities in Dreth space, and the Dreth had become humanity's most aggressive trade partners and unofficial military allies. The Council was losing its collective mind. Vornix called another emergency session, demanded I present my findings, and I stood there in that same ridiculous circular chamber where Kenji had walked out and tried to explain that humanity wasn't following any recognizable pattern because they didn't have a pattern to follow. They're chaos, I told the Council, and I meant it as an observation, not an insult. Every species we've encountered operates on logic, efficiency, optimization. Humans operate on stories, on feelings, on because it would be awesome. Thexara, who'd been monitoring human communications probably illegally, but nobody was calling her out on it, leaned forward. Analyst Vrichtal explained the incident with the Singing Nebula. Right. The Singing Nebula. How could I forget? A human musician named Diego Reyes Kim had read about the nebula in the Kepler 4000 Twistem, a stellar nursery where ionized gas and magnetic fields created radio emissions that, when converted to audio, almost sounded like music. Almost. If you were really generous with the definition, Reyes Kim wasn't generous. He was ambitious. He convinced a crew, got funding from what humans call a crowdsource campaign, where thousands of random humans donated money for no reason except they thought it was cool, and flew out there with a collection of what they call musical instruments and sound equipment. Then he spent 3 weeks recording the nebula, composing harmonies to match its natural frequencies, and broadcasting it back toward Earth as humanity's first collaborative performance with the universe. It was the most listened-to piece of music in human history. 2 billion humans experienced it in the first week. And it actually sounded good. I listened to it myself, and even with my different audio processing, I felt something. The humans called it beautiful. I called it disturbing evidence that this species finds meaning in the most unlikely places. But here's what made the council nervous. While Reyes Kim was out there making his cosmic symphony, his ship's sensors were also creating the most detailed maps of that stellar nursery anyone had ever produced. Maps that showed 3 potentially habitable planets in early formation, 2 rich asteroid fields, and a stable quantum flux ideal for advanced manufacturing. Humans were exploring the galaxy through art, through challenge, through curiosity, and accidentally building the most comprehensive database of exploitable resources anyone had ever seen, all while acting like they were just having fun. They're not trying to compete with us, I told the council. They don't even see us as competition. They're too busy competing with themselves, with their own limitations, with the universe itself. And that's what makes them dangerous. They don't have an off switch. They don't do stable. They don't do satisfy. Counselor Rennick, whose species valued cautious planning above all else, spoke up. What do you recommend? I thought about that for a long moment. About Kenji's smile, about Nakamura drinking Dreth warriors into friendship, about Reyes Kim composing with nebulae, about Santos building universities in space, about Zhao painting with asteroids. I recommend, I said carefully, that we stop thinking of them as a species seeking admission to our order and start thinking of them as a fundamental change to how galactic civilization operates. They're not going to join our system. They're going to build alongside it, and species will choose which model they prefer. The silence that followed was heavy with implications. It was Thixara who finally said what everyone was thinking. We denied them entry to protect our way of life. We may have accelerated its end. She was right, of course. Within a year, 16 species had established direct trade relationships with humanity, bypassing council tariffs and regulations. Within 2 years, the cooperation of independent systems had 40 member species, with more applying every month. The humans weren't conquering anyone. They were just offering an alternative. Freedom from bureaucracy, from endless committees, from species that had grown comfortable in their superiority. And that alternative was appealing to exactly the kind of species that made the galaxy interesting. The explorers, the artists, the rebels, the innovators. I met Kenji again about 3 years after that first council session. It was at a trade summit on New Prosperity, a human-founded station that had become the economic center for independent space. He was older, had more gray in his hair, but that same slight smile when he saw me. Analyst Vrixtol, he said, extending his hand in that human gesture of greeting. I'd learned to reciprocate by then. I hear you've been tracking our expansion. Someone has to, I replied. Your species is exhausting to monitor. Do you know you've established 379 different colonies, outposts, and stations in 3 years? That's more than the Zorvathian Empire built in a century, he laughed. We're motivated. Besides, we had something to prove. You proved it, I said. The Council's been receiving applications from species wanting to know if they can withdraw their membership and join your cooperation instead. You've disrupted 1,000-year-old trade routes. The Centaurian commercial sector has contracted by 23% because ships are routing through human space instead. And yet, Kenji said, his smile widening slightly, we keep sending the Council invitations to trade summits, defense conferences, cultural exchanges. We keep reaching out, because despite everything, we don't actually want to replace you. We want you to evolve. That hit harder than I expected. You're trying to change us. We're trying to remind you what it's like to be hungry, he corrected. Not for conquest, for experience, for growth, for the next challenge. Your species had that once, I guarantee it. All species do when they're young. But somewhere along the way, you got comfortable. You created systems designed for stability instead of innovation. You chose order over chaos. Order isn't a bad thing, I argued. But even as I said it, I knew how it sounded. Order is wonderful, Kenji agreed. But too much order is stagnation. You need some chaos, some disruption, some crazy artist building monuments in asteroid belts, or musician composing with nebulae, or drunk captain making friends with warrior species over tequila shots. He pulled out his ever-present tablet, showed me something, a proposal for a joint human Karim research station, focused on theoretical physics. We'd like to work with your people, Vrexental. Your species has 3,000 years of accumulated knowledge. We have enthusiasm and absolutely no respect for the word impossible. Imagine what we could discover together. I took the tablet, reviewed the proposal. It was comprehensive, respectful, offering equal partnership, and it promised research into things I'd been told were impossible. Faster-than-light communication, artificial gravity without rotation, energy sources that could power entire civilizations. Impossible things that humans seemed determined to make possible, just because someone told them they couldn't. I'll forward this to my superiors, I said, knowing even as I said it that this was the beginning of something. Not an end to the Galactic Council, but an evolution, a change. That's all we ask, Kenji said. Well, that, and maybe you could tell Vornix that we're naming a crater on Proxima Prime after him. The really big one that we're turning into a nature preserve. We figured he'd appreciate the honor. The absolute audacity of it made me laugh. An actual laugh, something I hadn't done since before this whole situation started. You're naming a crater after the being who denied you entry to the council, and you're framing it as an honor? It is an honor, Kenji said, completely serious now. He challenged us. He made us prove ourselves. If he'd accepted our application that day, we might have gotten comfortable, might have slowed down, might have started following the rules instead of making our own path. He did us a favor, even if he didn't mean to. And that's when I finally understood. Humans didn't want to join the galactic community. They wanted to expand it, push it, challenge it, force it to grow whether it wanted to or not. 6 months after that conversation, I accepted a position with the Human Karim Research Initiative. Spent the next decade working alongside humans, learning their strange mix of rigorous scientific method and willingness to try things that made no logical sense, just to see what would happen. I was there when they cracked faster-than-light communication. I was there when they made first contact with the collective intelligence of Andromeda and somehow convinced a species of pure energy beings to join a basketball league. Don't ask. It's a long story involving a very persuasive human named Chen Wei, and what I can only describe as weaponized enthusiasm. And I was there, 20 years after Kenji walked out of that council chamber, when Vornix himself submitted an official request for the Galactic Council to merge with the cooperation of independent systems, forming something new, something that combined the stability of the old with the chaos of the new. The vote passed unanimously. Even Vornix voted yes, his skin cycling through colors that indicated resignation, hope, and, I'm pretty sure, amusement. At the celebration afterward, Kenji found me. He was much older now, gray-haired, with laugh lines deep around his eyes, but that smile was exactly the same. We did it, he said simply. You did it, I corrected. You came in here, got rejected, and turned that rejection into a revolution. We asked for permission, he said, looking out at the crowd of species mingling. Dreth warriors laughing with Centaurian diplomats, Zorvathian artists discussing techniques with human sculptors, my own people engaged in debates with human theorists. They said no, so we built something better and invited them to join us instead. That's the human way. If the door's locked, we knock. If nobody answers, we build our own door. And you know what? He was right. Earth was denied entry to the Galactic Council that day in that ridiculous circular chamber. But humanity had other plans. They always do. And thank the stars for that. Because the galaxy is a much more interesting place with them in it. Chaotic, unpredictable, occasionally frustrating, but never ever boring. Sometimes being denied entry is the best thing that can happen to you. It forces you to make your own way, build your own path, create your own future. And sometimes, if you're lucky or if you're human, that future turns out better than anything you were asking permission to join in the first place. The Council learned that lesson the hard way. I learned it by watching, and now, as I write this report for the historical archives, I can't help but wonder, what are those magnificent, chaotic, impossible humans going to do next? Whatever it is, I guarantee it'll be something nobody saw coming. something that breaks half the established rules, and something that makes the galaxy a little bit bigger and a little bit more amazing than it was before. That's just what they do.